Hello, hello. Welcome to our new unit on measuring the economy. Please make sure that you have gone in and you have taken the quiz on market structures before you've moved on to this lesson. So I want to make sure that we understand and have wrapped up that unit. And before you start learning new information that will probably only confuse you, get that quiz done and submit it. Remember, you can use your study guide to help you, but just make sure that's submitted. That's due this Friday, so you want to make sure that you get that done before you attempt any of the new work for this week. What we're going to start with today is a unit on measuring the economy. This is going to be super relevant to the things that are going on in the world right now. Every single day, I am seeing news that is related to how we measure the economy and the effect that the coronavirus is having on the economy. And so, understanding the stuff that we're going to be talking about in this unit will really help you understand what's going on in the United States and in the world today. So, this is going to be really, really, really important to understanding the situation that we're currently in. So, this is a very, very relevant unit to what's going on in the world today. So, our topics for this unit are going to be 3 ways that we measure the economy. How do we know when the economy is doing well, and how do we know when the economy is not doing well? So we're going to be able to measure 3 different things. We're going to measure economic growth with something called the gross domestic product, which is what we're focusing on today. We're going to identify and measure inflation, and we'll also be able to measure the unemployment rate and identify different types of unemployment. And through all that, we'll be looking at what we call the business cycle. As the economy grows or as the economy shrinks, these 3 factors can help us determine which stage of the business cycle we are in. And again, this is so relevant, and lots of things are happening with this as we speak. So this is going to be a really important unit to help us understand our U.S. economy. So, what we're going to be looking at today is something called gross domestic product, and we're going to understand how that tells us what is going on in the economy as it pertains to the things that we produce, the things that we make. So, to start with here, the definition of the gross domestic product is the measure of the income and expenditures of an economy. What that means is this is the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. So usually that given period of time is 1 year. We are looking at what is the value, the monetary value, like how much money is the value of all of the goods that the United States makes in a year, or any country makes within a year. And we're looking at final goods and services. As the next bullet point says, GDP does not include the value of intermediate goods. Intermediate goods are goods used in the production of final goods and services. So what we're looking at is the total value of everything that is made in the United States. The value of all the automobiles, the value of all the cell phones, the value of all services too, the values of all haircuts. So you can imagine the United States, that is billions and trillions of dollars worth of goods that are produced in the United States every year. That is what the gross domestic product is measuring. And it's looking at final goods, not intermediate goods. An intermediate good would be something that you're using to make something else. So if I'm making a car, I would not include the glass as part of the GDP. I would only include the glass when it is part of the car. Okay, so we want to look at things that are in their final forms, not things that are going to be used to make something else. If we did that, we'd be double counting. We'd be counting those goods twice. We'd count them as glass, and then we'd also count it as a windshield in a car. So all final goods and services produced in a country are part of our GDP. So as this says again, GDP includes all items produced in the economy and sold legally in the markets. So it has to be made here in the United States, and it has to be bought and sold legally, which means there are some things that are not counted in GDP. Things that are produced at home and consumed at home, never enter the marketplace, those are not counted in GDP. So if you change your own oil, and you provide that service for yourself, that is not included in the GDP. If you bake a cake and then you eat that cake is not included in the GDP. So it has to be produced and sold in a market somewhere in order for it to be counted as part of GDP. So there are lots of things we do for ourselves that are not part of GDP. GDP also excludes things that are sold illicitly, like illegal drugs. So if things are sold on a black market or they're sold illegally, not on a legal market, those are not counted in the GDP either. Okay, but we still have millions and millions of things that are computed in our GDP. So to calculate the GDP, we use this formula. We have 4 things that we're going to add together to get our GDP. We're going to look at consumption goods and services, investment goods, government purchases, and what we call net exports, which is our exports minus our imports. So at the bottom there, that formula is going to be important in understanding and calculating GDP. The formula is GDP, which we represent with Y, is the sum of C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So what we're going to do is we're going to add up all of these things together. We're going to add up how much consumers are spending, how much businesses are spending in investment, how much the government is purchasing, and we're going to look at how much we make versus and sell to other countries versus how much we buy from other countries. And when you add up all those things together, that's going to give us a total dollar amount of how much our GDP is. So I'm going to go through what each of those 4 components are, and then you're going to do just a quick practice activity on Schoology today to identify what goods and services belong in which category. So the first category is consumption, and this is the spending by households on goods and services, which is spending by everyday people, with the exception of new housing. So everything that you and I buy is considered consumption goods. So you can see some examples down there at the bottom. Oil changes, cell phones, bread, water, dog food, getting a haircut. All of these things are considered consumption goods. Anything, if you're going to put it in this category, it's anything that just everyday people buy in their everyday life. In the United States, this makes up the largest component of GDP. We go out and spend our money, and as we spend our money, we're buying things that are made in the United States that are calculated as part of GDP. The second component of GDP is investment. Investment spending is spending by businesses. Anything that businesses are doing to get their business to grow and expand. So spending on capital equipment, inventory. This also includes new housing. So if you're buying machinery to help your business, you are doing investment spending. If you're increasing your inventory, so you're an auto dealer and you're buying more cars to put on your car lot, that is considered investment spending. If you're going to purchase new tools, that idea, that capital equipment, we talked about capital at the beginning of the semester, the things that help you make other things. If you're doing any kind of spending that a business would do, if you're going to build a new factory or a new warehouse, those are all considered investment spending in the category of investment by business. The next component of GDP is government spending, and this is spending on goods and services by local, state, and federal governments. So anytime the government purchases something or pays for something, which is done with taxpayer dollars, it is considered government spending. So public schools, public libraries, spending on defense. So if the government is going to buy more tanks or airplanes or weapons, that is government spending. Local governments and state governments will spend money on police force, on the army, on the fire department, on new roads and bridges. Everything that the government provides to us as a public good or service is part of government spending, and we know that belongs in the category of government. And then lastly, our net exports are our exports minus our imports. And an export is a good that we sell to another country, and we're going to subtract our imports, which are the goods that a country buys from another country. So we don't want to include our imports. We want to subtract those from our GDP, because even though we are purchasing them, GDP is measuring what's made in the United States. So if something is made in Japan and we're buying it, that does not count as a part of our GDP. But if we make something and we sell it to Mexico or we sell it to Brazil, that is included in the GDP because we made it here in the United States. So we add up all the things that we make in the United States and sell, we call those our exports, and we subtract, we minus our imports, the things that we buy from another country. So an example of that, calculating GDP, again, our GDP is Y equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M. You're going to add your consumer goods plus your investment plus your government, and you're going to take your exports and subtract your imports. So for example, if my consumption was $50,000, my investment spending was $10,000, my government spending was $30,000, my exports was $20,000, and my imports were $40,000. You can see that those numbers plugged in down at the bottom. It's a very simple calculation. You would add everything together. Add your consumption, $50,000, plus your investment, $10,000, plus your government spending, $30,000, and then you would add your X minus M. And in this case, it's a negative number because our exports are lower than our imports. You would do 20,000 minus 40,000. That would give us a negative 20,000. So we're going to add that negative number, which gives us a total of $70,000. In this scenario, our GDP is 70,000. So this shows you over time what GDP looks like. You can see GDP since the 1950s has grown. This is the United States, and this is giving us billions of dollars. So when this graph left off, which was approximately 2018, you can see that at the top of the graph, there was over about $22,000 billion worth of GDP. Anytime you see a gray line on this graph, it's a time of recession, those shaded areas. So one kind of key one you can see if you go to 2008, right before 2010 on the graph, you can see that little dip in GDP. 2008, the United States experienced a wide-ranging recession, and you can see that GDP declined. During recessions, we are not producing as many goods and services. And right now, we're probably going to see the same dip as companies are shutting down, as people are laying off workers because of the coronavirus effect. You're going to, when this graph continues and we see this a year from now, we'll probably see that same dip in GDP, that we are going to be producing less goods and services, and our economy will drop as a result. So we recover, and you'll see that recovery often happens after the fact, but GDP most certainly will see a decrease in GDP moving forward here in the next few months. So this is something I found. This is from March 18th. So just the middle of last month, it says that an economist says that the US GDP could drop 14% just in the second quarter. The second quarter, the economy is usually measured in 4 quarters, so every 3 months they do a calculation. And it says that we could see a shrink in the economy by 14%, which would be more than we saw in the 2008 recession. So they are looking at ways to try to boost the US economy because we know that GDP is going to go down. And so what are some of the things that we can do to get GDP to either increase or to support Americans if they're affected by that GDP decline? Lastly, here I want to talk about GDP per capita. GDP per capita is the total output of a country that takes gross domestic product and divides it by the number of people in their country. So instead of looking at billions of dollars GDP, we can take that GDP and we can divide it by the entire population. So if you look in that little box that says GDP per capita is GDP divided by population. If you look at the graph down there, you can see that the GDP per capita in the United States is $62,000. So if we took our total GDP, divided it by every single citizen in the United States, every single person would have $62,000. And that is more helpful, I think, when you're comparing it to other countries, because you can see in comparison to countries like Germany, which has $51,600 per person, or France, which has $45,200 per person, you can see the strength of the United States economy when we look at GDP per capita. Now, the reality is we don't do that. We don't all have $62,000. We don't divide up our GDP equally, but it gives us an idea of how much money there is per person in an economy, and that can help us compare how well our economy is doing to other economies. Okay, that's it for today. So, what you need to do when you're done listening to these notes is go into Schoology, and it looks like it's a quiz, but it's not a quiz. It's just an assignment to help you categorize different goods that are produced in the United States. So, I'm going to give you the name of a good or a service, something that is made here or done here in the US, and you have to decide which category does it fit into in the GDP. Is it consumption spending? Is it government? Is it investment? Is it an export? Or is it an import? Okay, so just I want to make sure that you're understanding what falls into each category. And then we'll continue talking about GDP in the next lesson, looking at it in more detail, looking at GDP per capita in more detail, and you're going to be doing some more categorization and calculations of GDP. As always, let me know if you have questions. Feel free to either text me or send me a message or an email, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Hope everyone's doing well. Talk to you soon.